Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we are brought to you by Mountain Tough Fitness. As we get deeper into hunting and trapping season, it's important to take care of your body and squeeze as much optimization out of it as you can. So if you haven't taken advantage of the promo code to get a free 30-day trial with Mountain Tough Fitness, make sure that you do it. The code is Okayest30, all caps 30, and it gets you 30 days of proctored coaching for backcountry fitness. Now, today's guest hails from the great state of Pennsylvania. She's a philanthropist, a hunter, an angler, an educator, and more importantly, a trapper. You may have seen her doing demos at multiple different state and national trapping conventions over the past few years, and it's my distinct honor to have her on. Autumn McEntee, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so pumped to be chatting with you. I know you've been trapping since you were young, so this will probably be a really pertinent question for you, and you probably don't have to go far back in the memory bank to answer it, but can you recall the first memory of being exposed to trapping that you've had in your life?
I can. I vividly remember catching my first raccoon with my dad, which at that time I was 8 years old, and the raccoon was almost as big as I was.
Is it the one hanging on the wall behind you? Because that looks like a pretty big boar.
It is not either of those. I wish it was. I have the picture somewhere. I wish I had it handy. But I vividly remember that moment, and then I was hooked from there.
So was your dad... I mean, he was clearly a trapper, but had he been trapping his whole life too? Is it like a family legacy sort of thing?
Yes. So my dad has been trapping his whole life, and for his work, he actually does nuisance work. So he pretty much traps 24/7.
Gotcha. So you come from the bloodline, but you said it was when you were 8 and you caught that first raccoon that you were hooked. Like, I mean, clearly you were exposed to trapping before that too, but what was it that made it different when you caught that raccoon, or with your dad with that raccoon, that, made you think in that moment, like, oh, this is something that I actually want to do?
I mean, when it all boils down, at that time, it was really just spending time with my dad. My dad's my best friend, and it was just another thing to do with him. I mean, we go fishing all the time, and I hadn't started hunting yet at that time, but because it was when I was younger, I'll be honest with you, I was really gun shy. Like I didn't want to shoot. I didn't want to shoot any sort of rifle at that time. So trapping was kind of a way to sort of go before when I started hunting. So that I think helped me make the jump into hunting, because I was very gun shy. I shot a 20 gauge when I was like 8, and I was like, this isn't for me right now. But I grew to love guns a lot. I was a very small child, and it was a lot at that time, but yeah.
Well, first and foremost, props to your dad. I have 2 young daughters and a son, all under 3 years of age, and they go on the trap line with me. But what you just said about your dad is my ultimate goal as a father. So props to him. Like, I hope my kids both one day say, my dad's my best friend, so it was more time to spend with him. That's flipping amazing. And with the raccoon, man, I love talking about these first experiences. Like, do you remember what it was like to walk up to it? Was it in a dog proof? Was it a foothold? Like, what was it? And like, were you scared? Like you said, it was almost as big as you. Like, what was that experience like for an 8-year-old girl?
I wasn't scared. I think I might have the picture here. I can send you a photo of it later.
Yeah,
but
I'll put it on with everything else so people can see what you're talking about.
But I wasn't scared. I was super excited, because I didn't really know what it was going to be like. My dad told me, we'll go and set all of our traps, and then we'll go and check in the next morning. And the next morning we had a raccoon, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. There's a picture of my dad holding one foot and me holding the other foot, standing there smiling. And my mom took the pictures. She came along. She comes along sometimes, not super regularly, but she was there to see it. So that was really cool too.
Oh man. And then from there, you said it had the hooks in you, and it was obviously pre-hunting, before you kind of shook the gun shyness that you had as a young kid. But, what was the evolution after that? Like, were you like, Dad, like we're gonna go set more traps tomorrow? Like, did you expand to other critters pretty quickly? Because you've had a lot of experience in the time you were 8 to now, when you've been trapping a lot. So what was the evolution like after that raccoon?
I discovered, well, my dad kind of showed me that like you can trap mink and muskrat and raccoons sort of in the same place. So that's what we went for first. And we tried a lot. I want to say a lot. We tried a fair amount for canines, but I'm not a big fan of land trapping still to this day. I'd much prefer to be in the water. Um, and then I think when I was 10, we found a property that we had trapped previously, that has a creek that runs off of the Susquehanna River. And one year, a family of beavers had made their way up that creek. So that was my first beaver trapping experience. And that was absolutely phenomenal. And I remember very vividly when we went to set the beaver traps, back then beaver trapping opened the day after Christmas. So I remember sitting in the truck till 7 a.m. waiting for that clock to strike 7 to go set beaver traps. And when we went out to set them, we saw 2 of the beavers. We got to see 2 of them swimming along, and that was the coolest experience ever.
Yeah,
But
the river trapping to me is also like, I mean, I love wolf trapping and some of the canine stuff, but river trapping holds something special. I think when you have to strap on waders and walk in, and you're a pretty successful angler too. So it sounds like everything that you're focused on, like maybe outside of hunting, is in the river. So it seems like it all just kind of came together for you in that arena.
yes, it does. And as I've grown older, being able to go out and duck hunt and then check my beaver traps is the perfect morning. I actually one time, we had a duck blind built out on the river with a group of people I hunted with. And the one morning we came in and there were beaver tracks through the floor of the duck blind.
Yeah, they knew you were there. They're like, well, this is a
Yes.
safe spot. That's pretty funny. And so you're doing mink, beaver, a little bit of everything. And you had your dad guiding you along the way, right? Pretty much the whole time, as far as, making sets. Like, do you remember like the first sets you made? So like, let's talk about those beavers that kind of swam upstream. Like, were you setting conibears, footholds? Like, what was kind of like your repertoire of trapping, approaches?
So we set, for those beavers that I caught when I was 10, we set 2 conibears. And I remember I couldn't, well, obviously at that age, I couldn't set the conibear. Even with the locking setters, I had no choice, or I had no hope. I remember I made the caster mounds. That's the job that I got, was making the caster mounds. And that was a lot of fun. I remember slapping the mud off with my giant shoulder length gloves that I did not need at that time. But that was a really great memory. But conibears are my personal favorite even to this day. The footholds work really well too, but I prefer sort of a faster approach. If they're there, I'm going to get them.
Yeah.
And then I can move on, because last year, my boyfriend and I and a friend of ours trapped out on the river, and we would catch like several beaver every day. And that was like 6+ hours in the first shed every night, which was absolutely insane. I love skinning beaver though, so I don't have a problem, but it was really cold and just a lot of work. So,
I'm going to go ahead and jump to this question then, because that was not the answer I was expecting. Like, the fur shed and skinning beavers, like, I love beaver trapping. I hate beaver skinning.
I love it.
Well, this is where I want to ask the why, because last week I had to do a control job, and the beaver was surprisingly had decent fur, so I skinned him out and had a lot of fat, and it just takes me forever. I haven't found the secret sauce for, being pretty quick and efficient at beaver skinning. So what's the secret? Like, you have a smile on your face. I've never had a smile on my face thinking about skinning beavers, and I don't think most people do.
I love to skin beavers. The trick is to have a good knife, I guess. I like to use my Dexter, but I've used my Havalon too when I'm in a pinch and I'm somewhere where I have to skin something and I don't have my beaver knife with me. But I lay them. Do you skin in a trough?
No, I'm just flat on a table.
Oh, that's probably where your problem is. I skin in a
Ah.
trough. On we kind of build a platform with two troughs, one trough on either end, and you put it up on sawhorses so you don't have to like lean over and break your back. And then you plop the beaver on its back in the trough and you slit it from the chin down to the tail. And then you just start skinning, and that kind of keeps it from rolling, and it kind of helps keep your tension, because the thing that I find the hardest is keeping that tension while I'm cutting, because they're so blubbery. But skinning in a trough like that really helps.
And are you like just rough skinning, or are you?
Oh, rough skinning, yeah.
Okay. And then you're taking it to the fleshing beam after that then?
Yes. And
Okay.
I was super privileged to have a personal lesson from probably the best beaver skinner I know. His name's Steve Lynn. I got to go to his first shed and watch him skin a beaver, and he uses a blue English fleshing system like I do, but he puts me to shame. I would never be able to do what he does to a beaver. I mean, just beautiful. He can put up a beaver in probably like a half an hour.
Wow. And so for people listening who don't know what the blue English system is, like, can you explain that a little bit and how that operates and works?
So a blue English fleshing system is an upright fleshing system, where you're pulling, versus the traditional fleshing system where you're leaning over a board and pushing down. And the blue English fleshing knives actually are really, really nice. We own two of them, and they're very sharp, very high quality. And two different size boards come with the blue English fleshing system. You just kind of have to use your best judgment as to what you're fleshing, what goes on which board. But I think the pulling part of it gives more leverage, and I'm less likely to put nicks in the fur. But yeah.
What happened? I mean, are nicks? I know for me, like, is when I don't brush out the fur well enough, and there's a burr or something, and I run over it with my my
Yes.
fleshing knife. Is that the same for you, even in the blue?
Yes.
Or okay.
Yes, and I think even for beginners, like, the pressure and the angle is kind of easier to distinguish versus pushing, because actually went out to the FTA college in Indiana last September, and they didn't have a blue English system. When I actually snared a beaver out there, and when I was fleshing it, like, we had to skin and flesh and all that. They had the traditional fleshing beams, and I'm standing there pushing, and I put a big old hole in it, and I was like, I'm not used to this. But
Well,
standing there, like, trying to like keep it like on the board, and like that was crazy. So I'm very, very thankful for my blue English.
well, you and I had talked a little bit about that through social media when I had posted something about beaver fleshing. I've never tried it, but I've only done traditional fleshing, and it's a struggle. Like you said, you're trying to pin the hide to the board with your chest or your rib cage and pushing, and it is easy to punch holes and stuff. And I'd be very interested to give it a try. But you mentioned the FTA, so the Fur Takers of America Trappers College, and this is a question I had for you, so it's great timing, and you made the segue seamless. But you're a graduate of that college. Can you tell listeners a little bit about it? I talked with Paul Ansack about his experience, but like, what is it? How long is it? And I think it's actually going on next week for this year's rendition.
Yes.
And what were your takeaways? Like, did it really up your game as a trapper? And
So Paul was actually one of my instructors last year when I went. It was the most incredible experience that I've ever had. Like, the camaraderie is insane. You meet people from all over the country. Like, I met the New Mexico wolf biologist. I met so many different people, and I made a lot of great connections. I think the trapping information, I personally took away more from the evening sessions that we did with Gary Jepson, Robert Colonna, Mike Mazur. I thought those were the coolest. Like, Mike Mazur did fur grading. Robert Colonna talked about trap locations and lure and bait making, and why to use this scent versus something else. But something that was actually really special was Ronnie Leggett actually came out and taught a class for us, and I look up to him. We're very good friends now after the college. He was there to see me snare my beaver, and that was the best experience of the whole week, because Ronnie Leggett is there taking pictures of me with my beaver. But you make lifelong friends. I would highly, highly, highly recommend it if you can go. I was fortunate enough to be chosen for a scholarship to be able to go. But it was a phenomenal experience. I made some awesome friends, and I would 100% go back.
Well, you mentioned earlier that your go-to with beavers, conibears, but then you were able to snare a beaver at the college. Was that your first time snaring for beaver?
Yes, it was.
Well, hit me with like the high level. Like, what's the trick on beaver snaring?
I have no idea. I was really excited. We would all go and check our traps as a group, and we had to hit a couple of different properties. And I was so excited to get to this beaver snare, because the one instructor, Doug McKenzie, was like, "You'll have a beaver here tomorrow," in his little Tennessee accent. So I was like, "Okay." So when we got there, when we got to the property, when everybody else was checking their traps, and they were like just a spot before where the beaver was, I got out of the truck and I started walking down, and I looked and I was like, oh no, I didn't get him, because this beaver's sitting on the bank looking at me. And I took a picture of it because I didn't think people would believe me. I was like, I didn't get it. Like it's sitting up on the bank. I caught it by the tail. So so I cannot give any secrets on beaver snaring. I have no idea. I think that was a little bit of luck.
That's pretty
But
cool.
yeah, it was very.
And what was the other, like, I mean, let's just hit each different thing. So the snaring was lucky. What were the other like key takeaways outside of the camaraderie? Like, did you pick, I mean, obviously you got to flesh in a traditional way, but were there any like major tips or tricks that have just completely changed the way that you approach trapping now?
I
Or
think
just culmination of everything?
Yeah, honestly, I did actually also manage to catch a possum in a cable restraint, um, which was also a first. I've never caught anything in a cable restraint, but that was a good takeaway, because that cable restraint had sat on a trail that looked fresh all week, but I hadn't
Mhm.
caught anything in it until I think it was the last day. Um, and it opened my eyes to other ways of trapping that aren't legal in Pennsylvania. Like out there, you can use conibears on land, which we
Mm.
cannot do in Pennsylvania. And there were a lot of people that had success catching raccoons and conibears on land. And so that gave me a brand new perspective. And I felt wrong. I was like, I can't do this. Like, I don't want to do this. Because I didn't want to get used to it and then come home and be like, oh, well, but it was a whole combination of just different perspectives, and getting to meet people, and just the expertise from the instructors. They tell you to bring a notebook, but I filled a notebook almost 3/4 full with notes. Um, it's an extremely valuable experience, and after the college, you can reference and call your instructors anytime if you have any questions. So like you can have Gary Jepson on the phone if you have a question about, so that's really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, you know, it's 2024. The fur market has been a little wishy-washy for the past decade or more. So, as a young woman, outside of just the heritage you have with it within your family, like what's your biggest motivation for trapping now? Like, is it the challenge? Is it the fur? Is it some of the meat you might get? Like, what is it that keeps Autumn in the woods and in the river for trapping in our day and age?
So my love for turkey and duck hunting is what keeps me, and my need to give back. Is it wasn't I loved to hunt ducks, and it wasn't I hadn't even killed 2 ducks before I joined Delta Waterfowl and started doing habitat work and putting up woody boxes and nest tubes for ducks. And so birds are probably my biggest passion, but trapping came first. And so trapping is kind of a way that I can give back to the birds, and also be a steward of the land. Because I don't have a big piece of land to manage or to make good habitat or to do habitat work on like I would like to. But I do have the ability to trap and to manage predator populations and to make sure that I'm giving the ducks and geese a good chance of survival if I can't give them a place to do it. So,
well, for listeners who might be interested in trapping but might not have the firsthand experience, can you explain a little bit about why trapping and the critters that you're targeting helps the birds? Like, uh, I think trappers will know about like ground nesting birds and raccoons, but maybe just explain a little bit about why that helps.
the biggest reason why trapping helps ground nesting birds is because raccoons, skunks, and opossums are all predators of ground nesting bird eggs, but foxes and coyotes and bobcats and fishers will all prey upon adult birds. And so by reducing predator populations, not eliminating, we can sort of create more of a balance in the ecosystem and give them a better shot, as well as managing disease in populations, as well as managing the effects of urbanization as we build more developments and more hospitals and more shopping malls. Wildlife has less of a place to live, and that means that everybody's getting crowded into smaller spaces, which leads for more disease breeding grounds, less food to go around, more fighting. So in managing these populations backed by science-based data, it helps all species, but primarily the prey species that they eat.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest, hearing you say that's beautiful, because I think a lot of people who are on the outer fringes of even hunting, but like the trapping community, it's looked at as a certain thing, which sometimes can be perceived as barbaric or, gone with old times. But the way you put it in those conservation terms was so articulate, because, like you said, your love for duck hunting is what's really driving you to continue your trapping career, trying to kind of keep a balance in, this conservation effort to be able to have the birds that we can then go hunt in a very regulated way, as much as we can take the raccoons and the opossums and everything else in a very regulated way to help keep a balance and give both of them a chance. And it's, lucky for you, you get to double dip. You get to do both things that you enjoy and you love, and they balance out, I guess.
Yes, they do. And something that I don't think a lot of people who look down on trapping realize is that we're always trying to improve our equipment through BMPs or best management practices, using laminated jaws, placing more swivels on the chain, using offset jaws, doing anything we can to make it a better process. Not that it's bad in any way, but if we can improve upon anything, we want to. Sportsmen, especially trappers, care for the wildlife more than anybody that I know. So,
yeah, and for those who don't know, BMPs are stand for Best Management Practices, and is funded by AFWA, which I think in episode maybe 5, I had the program manager Bryant White from AFWA on here to talk about that. And even this winter, I'm doing another AFWA study for BMPs for live cage trapping marten. But to your point, like, that's making my job harder by investing in these studies that can then be empirically, put together online for people to say, like, what is the best, most ethical means of take for these animals in a trapping means with science behind it. And I think, a lot of trappers do take that information in and leverage it. And if they don't, go check it out, because you should. And for anti-trappers or people who are on the fence, like, to Autumn's point, there's a lot of effort that goes into this by trappers to say, like, this can be done in a very efficient, very ethical way, which is pretty awesome. And then I have to ask, you've been trapping for a long time, and this is called the Okayest Trapper podcast because I am the Okayest Trapper. What is the biggest mistake that you can remember that you made on your trap line?
I remember I I set a dog proof too close to a tree, and I had a raccoon pull out of my trap, and that was the only time that I've ever had a raccoon pull out of my trap. But yeah.
And what was it that was too close to the tree that made it? Was he just able to get leverage off of the tree?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, he was able to grab onto a limb and pull right out. So
heartbreaking.
It was.
Yeah.
But that's all right. He lived another day to try again. So
Yep. And follow-on question. What's the biggest mistake that you've ever made in the fur shed?
Ooh.
If you're like me, I have like a whole laundry.
I also do. Um Probably the biggest mistake that I made was not asking for help sometimes when I need it. Like I like skinning beaver a lot because I don't have to strip any tails because I can't. I cannot strip a coontail to save my life. I can hold on to that tail stripper and hang there off the gambrel and it still won't come out. I don't know why. I can do foxes, fine. I cannot do coontails. And I've ripped off quite a few trying to do that without asking for help. So now I don't do it at all. Like I'll skin the whole thing and then leave or as far down as I can get. And then I'll just leave the tail. And if I'm skinning by myself, my dad will come out and do the tail and then I'll finish it. But yeah.
That's pretty good. Yeah. The tail stripping. I have that problem with like otters. That's a tough one to
I would imagine.
get down there.
Yeah. I was really nervous when I was skinning my fisher. I was so nervous that I was going to rip the tail off, but I didn't rip the tail off and I was very happy.
Well, that's a good question that I did have. So in Pennsylvania, I know there is a fisher season, right? But the quota is 1. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that because I mean, I love trapping marten. We don't have fisher in my part of Idaho. There is some in northern Idaho, but was it a live trap, a conibear? Like what did you have to do to go and jump through the hoops to be able to trap that fisher?
So it was a foothold trap, anchored to a drag. And
you were targeting fisher for this, right?
Yes. Okay. Yes. It's a lot like bobcat trapping.
Mm-hmm.
And trapping essentially the same terrain, Rocky Mountains, evergreen forests, deep in the mountains, near water. But I think I caught him on the 3rd or 4th day I had my trap out. But it's essentially a dirt hole set in the middle of the woods.
Wow.
And it was on a hill that I kid you not was like this. So bedding the trap presented some difficulty, but I was very excited. It was a very, very nice fisher for the area. So
what's the population of fishers like there? Pretty healthy?
I think it's pretty healthy. I'm seeing more and more. I'm actually seeing quite a few hit along the road, which shows me that there's quite a few to go around. But I don't think there's an overabundance. And people here are on a kick about fishers are killing all the turkeys. Well, I don't agree with that. Because in states like Maine, where they have fishers and they have marten, the limit is, I believe, 5 turkeys a year. And if the fishers were eating all the turkeys, you would not be able to sustain that sort of bag limit on your wild turkeys. So fishers get a lot of hate, but I think they're a very cool creature. And they're also trying to reintroduce the pine marten the American marten into Pennsylvania. But people are against that too because they think that it's going to hurt the turkeys. But the most important thing for turkeys by far is having the right habitat, not only for the adult turkeys, but for nesting and brood rearing, because they're not the same sort of habitat. So
that's pretty cool. And what did you end up doing with the fisher? Did you get a mount or anything, or did you just get the fur can?
I'll go get it.
I want to see this.
I've done it.
Oh, there we go. So for those who don't,
I would also bring my hooped beaver.
Nice.
But this is my fisher.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I'll post a picture for this for people who are on audio only. But
yes, and with the claws on, which is really cool.
That's pretty cool. Did you do anything with the skull? Because they have pretty gnarly teeth. And
Yes, I did.
all right, see, yeah, this is how you know you're a trapper, because you get every little thing.
He's right here.
Yep, awesome.
Yep.
Cool. And speaking of like learning from doing and learning from mistakes, you've done quite a bit of teaching.
Yes.
So from demos to Trapper's Ed to broader speaking engagements about trapping birds, deer, everything. Have you always loved education? And what makes trapper education different?
Yes, I've always loved education. Currently, I am working in education, but I think trapper education is so important just because it's one of the most controversial topics that we have out today. And it's something that people are trying to take away because they're uneducated. And I think I know everybody has a different perspective on it, but perspectives are based on, how somebody was raised, what their family influence was like, how they grew up. And I feel like I have a pretty good ability of being able to see both sides of the story and being able to understand where people are coming from. So I think that gives me a good window to be able to talk to people and say, hey, well, why do you think this and this? And be able to have a good conversation that might not always be, that shouldn't ever be, trapping is right and you're wrong. And I don't agree with taking that approach ever, because it's never going to work. You have to really communicate with people. And if you just talk and they don't understand you, communication is being heard, not just listened to. And you have to know how to do that with people. And being able to educate on a topic that I've been so lucky to be fully immersed in and know so much about has been truly a privilege. And so, yeah, that's where my love for trapping education comes from.
And what would you tell somebody who is not anti-trapping, but maybe on the fence, like that would want to try trapping? Like, what would your advice be to somebody who's like, I'm not against it. I've never really thought about it, but Autumn, you bring up these great points about conservation. Like, where should I start in trapping as a newcomer?
Well, my very first recommendation is to look into your state trappers association. Typically, they provide really great resources. I know every district in the Pennsylvania Trappers Association hosts a trapper training school every year, which is a wonderful place to start, somewhere you can go and be hands-on with the equipment and talk to people with experience. But I would try to gather as much information as you can before you try it yourself, because it is quite an investment if you just go out to purchase all of the things and then say, oh, I'm not interested in this. It's better to find someone who will take you. And unlike in the fur boom, when nobody would take anybody trapping or show anybody their secrets, nowadays is a really great time to get into it because people are more than willing to take you out and show you the ropes.
Yeah. And if you had to have or give one piece of advice or piece of equipment that you find invaluable in your trapping success nowadays, like what would be your go-to piece of advice and go-to piece of equipment that you'd always have in your trap basket or whatever you're carrying out with you?
My go-to piece of advice would be to learn as much as you can about the animal, because you can't catch it if you don't know what it wants or where it goes. And my go-to piece of equipment, it's probably my dog proof setter or my locking 330 conibear setters, which are extremely invaluable because there's only so much strength in these gummy worms. I can't squeeze the conibear springs and put the safety hook on at the same time. So the locking,
I know you work out, so I mean, maybe we can do the Mountain Tough fitness thing too. And
I think so. I think I'd be a great candidate. There's a lot going on here. So
and one thing that's very new to me as I am maturing in my trapping journey is the opportunity to do demos. And I know you've done that as well. Like, what is the hardest thing about giving trapping demos at a convention or, insert any meetup of trappers?
honestly, I don't know. I think it's probably being prepared for people's questions because it differs wherever you go. And the most important thing is to be honest with people. Like, even if you don't know the answer, either find it for them or direct them to somebody who does know the answer. Don't ever give a fake response because um, that there's no integrity in that. So just being prepared to answer people's questions and being able to redirect them efficiently in front of other people who are waiting to ask you a question is probably the hardest part. I do enjoy public speaking a lot. So that's not, I feel like that's what gets a lot of people. Like, a lot of the best trappers I know don't want to talk in front of a crowd. But their knowledge is absolutely invaluable.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I think, if you can get over the hurdle of fear of talking, I think you're dead on, is, showing like, this is what I know and what's working for me. And I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. I think that tide's turning, like you mentioned, like back in the fur boom when people wouldn't want to take people on the trap line or were secretive or I know best. I think the proliferation of online information too is forcing people to be more open, to be like, I don't know everything. And critters do weird things. Critters in one state do different things than critters in another state. And, being open to trying all sorts of different tactics and approaches and knowing there is not necessarily always one right way, is pretty cool. But with trapping being under the gun across the board, we saw New Mexico lose their public land trapping rights. The many Western states have, Eastern states have been, really punished for a long time, on a bunch of different methods of take, if not fully taken away in some instances. What do you see as the future of trapping? Like, we're both young, we're both going to be trapping hopefully into our old age, but like, what do you see the future if you had a crystal ball?
Oh boy. Well, my future would be extremely optimistic if I had it my way. But I think that, like you said about social media, I think social media is doing a lot more harm for trapping than it is good in some aspects. Like, a lot of the pictures that we post are being used against us, and take the things that we say taken out of context completely and twisted against us. Um, and there are some people out there who have really big platforms for trapping and are telling people the wrong thing, or they're not portraying trapping in a good light, and they're not being good role models. And that's something that's really key, is people with a platform have to be good role models, especially in trapping. It's incredibly vital, especially with all the lawsuits and things we face. I know there was a couple years ago there was a law, or a bill proposed that would ban even the possession of steel jaw traps. It was, I think the fine was $500 a trap, and then if you had so many, you would spend like 2 years in jail just for possession.
Where was this being proposed at? You remember?
I think it was New York.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
I think it was either New York or maybe New Jersey. I don't exactly remember, but it was on the East Coast. But yeah, that's absolutely ridiculous. Like, you can't even, if you can't possess the traps, then you can't trap.
Yep.
So they're finding really unique ways to try to hurt what we do. And I don't think that they understand that when there's no more of us, then there's going to be havoc wreaked on the populations, or they are going to be personally paying their tax dollars to hire government trappers to do the same thing that we would have done for free.
Yep. What do you think is the driver for that mentality? Like, clearly your generation, my generation, the generation before me to an extent, like, the bulk of us are like so far removed from how things are actually done in the world. We get to hide behind our grocery stores for food. We get to go to Target for our clothes. We don't have to make our own clothes anymore. Like, what do you believe is the main driver for this push of saying like hunting, trapping, the like doesn't have a place in our modern society?
I think it's a lot of I think a lot of it is backed by emotion and personal feelings. And I think another big issue is personification of animals, like
Mm.
saying, well, this is a mommy and this is a baby and this is a daddy. Well, that's an adult and that's a juvenile. Um, Instead, the personification of animals um, gives it emotion, gives it human characteristics. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's called anthropomorphism,
Yep.
um, and therefore gives it um, sort of more an emotional tug on the heart. Like the Disney movies coming out where it's, the animals and they're talking and they're having a great time and they've got all these human qualities. That doesn't help a lot either. A lot of people reference Bambi.
Mm-hmm.
And when they say, oh, well, they killed Bambi's dad. I mean, in real life, fawns have no idea who fathered them. Most deer are made up of several DNA, the DNA of several bucks. So, I mean, I feel like people don't want to look at reality, and they also there's a trendsetter or like a follower mindset today, especially with social media, that everybody just wants to hop on the bandwagon of something that they think is great, like the Stanley Cups or the Starbucks cups or whatever. And that's just a small example, but I mean, I'm obviously not anti-trapping at all, but that's something that people can really get behind, especially if they have dogs and they don't want people trapping their dogs. I know people that hunt with dogs that hate trappers because we could hypothetically catch their dog. Will their dog ever get caught? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. But good, responsible trappers take lots of measures to prevent that. And good, responsible dog owners keep their dogs on a leash, or, ask the landowner, and don't trespass on other people's properties where your dog could get caught in a trap that you have no idea is there, which is the whole point. So, yeah.
So you're proposing civil society where
I
people understand and ask questions and are curious and are open-minded to various different ways of living a life?
Yes, I am. Exactly.
Oh, well, that's novel. I don't know if we'll ever see that, but
I don't think so. That's my crystal ball vision. But
yeah.
I wish. I can only hope. I have no idea what's going to happen. They could ban trapping tomorrow.
Yeah, well, we're gonna keep fighting so that doesn't happen. But you mentioned deer, right? And the anthropomorphizing of animals, Bambi's dad. Another hat tip to you for anybody who's in the anti-hunting, anti-trapping space. Probably aren't listening to this podcast, but you're actually starting a new role with the NDA and a field. What is it called? The field to fork coordinator.
Yes.
And that's an awesome title, by the way. And would you talk a little bit more about what you're going to be doing? Because again, this is a new role for you, but it's also right in the same vein of everything else that you're passionate about. So I'm really excited for you.
Yes, I'm very excited. So I will be taking over the position as the Pennsylvania Field to Fork Coordinator for the National Deer Association, which I'm elated about. My dream has been to work alongside wildlife, with wildlife, in a wildlife organization. So this is really fulfilling that. And as a first step in my career, I couldn't be more excited. I'll be assisting on mentored hunts, coordinating events, writing articles and blog posts. So, and educating the public on, we're united for deer, and our mission is essentially to ensure the future of wild deer, deer hunting, and wildlife habitat. So that really aligns with all the stuff that I already do, and I'm very excited to be doing it for a job.
Yeah, I mean, well, Pennsylvania is very lucky to have you because you said you're like the full stack, outdoors woman, where you've got the trapping to help with the birds, so you can do the bird hunting, which is going to help with other, habitat for deer. So you really go from top to bottom. And I know you said you're going to be doing some mentored hunts, but like field to fork, like do you know yet, like, what the education system will be around, like, exposing to people the benefits of wild game consumption?
I'm not 100% sure, honestly.
Well, even from your own experience, like, I'm sure growing up in your household, you ate a lot of wild game meat.
Oh, yes. And speaking of that, beaver meat is actually incredible.
Mhm.
Very good. If you put it in front of me, I would never guess that it was beaver. I also really like goose.
Yep.
That's my favorite. But I think that a really great point to make to people who might be on the fence or anti-hunting is that most outdoors people make it a solid effort to use everything from whatever we take. Like I showed earlier, my fisher skull. I'll use the feathers from birds that I don't get mounted for fly tying to catch trout, and they eat the meat. I try to use everything, and if I have a carcass, say I trap muskrats, I save the muskrat carcass to use as bait for mink in a blind set or in a pocket set. Um, so it all really ties together, and like I said, a good sportsman uses all of the parts of whatever they take. Like you see the pelts behind me on the wall.
Right.
So
I've got a jar full of baculum around here too. So I mean, we're using everything.
yes, and some people get really creative with it, but I've had fur teddy bears made. There's a lot of beautiful things that you can do with fur, and wild game meat is really good. And most people, there's some people, especially down south, that actually do eat raccoons. That's a delicacy down there. I haven't heard of people doing it so much up here, but it's really popular down there. So, oh, and you can take the glands, you can take the urine for bait and lure. There's a million things you can do. And I think that's part of what makes it so rewarding is that you take and you get so much. And some people think you just have a dead animal. No, you have this, and this to do all these things with, and it just is furthering what you're able to do.
And so, I've got one more question, and then I gotta go into like the two like lightning round questions I ask every guest. But you know, what's next for you? I mean, obviously you're starting the new role, but like, what does this trapping season look like? Is there anything you're looking forward to on the horizon, whether that be fishing, hunting, trapping?
So I'm really excited to get up to the Salmon River this fall in New York. I'm also really excited to get back out and beaver trap. And I'm really hoping that I will successfully trap a bobcat this year because I didn't last year.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed, and when you do, we'll post that up as well. But all right, the lightning round questions. These are the two I ask every guest. In all of your experience, with your dad as a kid through now in the woods, what's the wildest experience you can remember ever being outside in the woods or in the river?
Oh, um,
Alien encounters, meth heads,
no,
wild animals.
that's a good one. So, one time I was turkey hunting and I was sitting back in the wood edge around a clearing. It was a really small clearing, and I fell asleep in my chair. And I woke up and I looked up, and there's a 4-point buck in velvet standing there sniffing the end of my boot.
Wow. Did you
Yeah.
freak out, or did you just like
Oh,
stay
no, I
calm
just
with
sat
your
there.
eyes?
I just sat there and looked at it, and it looked at me, and I was like, "Oh no."
That's pretty cool. Was that? I mean, that was probably like a little bit of a spiritual experience. Then, how long did he sit there sniffing your boot before he spooked or ran off?
He kind of was like when I looked up at him, he was because I didn't even know he was there because I had my hat on and I was sitting like this in my chair sleeping. So when I looked up and he was there, and I was like, and he was like, and then he kind of like slowly backed up and he stuck around for probably 25 minutes, just like kind of looking at me to figure out what I was. Because like a minute ago I was a tree stump and now I have eyes. So
Did he end up snorting at you when he gave up after
oh
25?
yes, oh yes, he started at me and then he flicked his tail at me and he went away. So
Well, that's a pretty cool experience. So then the last one is always a hypothetical. So it's going to be a tough choice you have to make. If you had to choose between unlimited trapping rights in your state, but that's all you could do, no hunting, no fishing, nothing else, or unlimited fishing access, but no hunting or trapping,
Oh
which
God.
would you choose and why?
Oh God. Oh no.
I know it's never easy.
That's terrible. Oh God. Um, I'm, I want to say, like, just for me or for everyone.
Let's go with just you.
Oh boy. Okay, that changes my answer. No, I think I'm gonna stick with just fishing, just because um I don't. I think having unlimited trapping access, you said like all year round.
Mhm.
I think that would do more harm than good on most species. It wouldn't allow them to breed effectively. It wouldn't leave seed on a property for another year to come back and trap them again. And I think that would do more harm than good. So I would go with fishing all year round because fish reproduce really fast, and 99% of the time I catch and release everything.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that would be better overall for the environment. But yes, I would pick fishing.
Good answer. Not an easy answer, but
No,
a
not at
good
all.
answer. You'd probably be depressed while you're out fishing, thinking
Yeah,
about trapping some, but
see a
um,
raccoon run down the bank and I'd be like, oh well.
yeah, I can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
But Autumn, thank you so much for making the time to come on. I really enjoyed it. I loved getting to know you better and hearing your background and your story. But where can people find out more about what you're going to be doing? I know you mentioned with the NDA, you'll be writing blogs and stuff. Any social media or anything else that people could check out to kind of follow along in your journey?
So you can find me on Facebook at Autumn McEntee. You can find me on Instagram at pa.trapper.girl. Um, and that's about it.
Cool. Well, Autumn, good luck with the new role. Good luck with trapping this season. And for everybody listening, we'll catch you on the next episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast.
Thank you.